Every 62 minutes, we are losing someone to an eating disorder. And today on The Girls, we are going to be discussing two specific eating disorders, and that's anorexia and bulimia.
Yes, today joining us, we have not only people who are suffering from this disorder, but also the mothers. And we have joining us first is Tracy Palizzi, and she is a mother of a girl who had an eating disorder. So Tracy's going to discuss with us some of the things that would be something that maybe another mother could look for, maybe a way that we would be able to identify what the eating disorder is. First of all, welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Tracy. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you for having us. We feel this is such an important issue. I guess there is no signs or symptoms really to a parent. In our case, and I can only speak from my story, and you can ask the other mothers how they kind of found that their child was suffering from an eating disorder. Our daughter ran cross country in high school, and it became excessive. Not only would she run, she'd come home, she'd run, and then we saw she became restrictive on food. And then foods that she used to enjoy to eat, she just kind of stopped eating altogether.
Well, something you just said there is something that a lot of mothers might see with their children. So when you said excessive, she was running, but maybe did she use excuses that the coach wanted her to, or how long did that go on before you actually realized that she had a problem?
Well, cross-country practice is usually 2.5 miles. Okay. And then she'd come home. She might eat a small snack of food, let it be half an apple, and then go run downstairs on a treadmill for another 2 miles, and then not feel that was enough, and feel to go back downstairs and run. And I don't want to say that participating in school, doing sports, everyone has an eating disorder, because that's not the case. It's just to be more observant, watch your child's habits. If you see all of a sudden foods that they enjoyed eating become taboo.
What is anorexia and what is bulimia?
Well, that can be really complex because anorexia, people just automatically assume you're skeletal and that you just totally stop eating food. You totally restrict, and that's not the case. There's many types of anorexia. Let it be restriction, cutting back on foods, purging. People just assume that if you purge, you're bulimic, and that's not the case either.
So you eat a large quantity of food and then...
Not necessarily. Okay. Let me backtrack.
Okay.
So she would overexercise, and she would complain that she was dizzy. She would complain of headaches. She would have all these symptoms, so we started seeing our pediatrician, and we started following the pediatrician who could not put a finger on as to why she was symptomatic. Okay. So we started seeing a pediatric cardiologist who, we tried medication, we tried different things, and someone said to me once, does she get up and go right to the bathroom after dinner? And she did. So I tracked her one night and caught her expelling her food, purging. So then that's when we realized that we had a bigger problem. We were not prepared how to handle it.
What do you do from that point? How do you handle that situation?
I think you go into overdrive and you just want to, we were not prepared. And there is not much in this state for kids with eating disorders. So we just, through trial and error, learned along the way, along the bumpy road, I should say. And education and awareness is so important, because the sooner it's detected, the sooner treatment is given, the better chance for recovery for them. And there are so many organizations out there that do help parents find those treatment centers and give you the help that you need to guide you along the way, which I didn't have.
And that's one of the reasons for today's show, is to not only educate people, but also to make sure that along your journey, you're understanding now that the Anna Weston Act is in the Senate, and you're trying to get awareness for the particular act, that it's never had an act that's gone this far.
Correct. So we have 3 senators in our state, in Pennsylvania, 2 have signed on, 1 has not. It's a nonpartisan bill, and it is bringing awareness and holding insurance companies accountable for eating disorder treatment. And as you speak to the other parents, you will hear our journey of the fight and struggle when you're a family member trying to get your child the correct treatment and help that they need, and then you have to battle an insurance company along the way.
Tracy, when I first spoke with you over the phone, because I saw you on television and I knew that you were doing seminars, when someone has an eating disorder, it's not just them going through it, it's actually your entire family that is going through this eating disorder. How does something like this affect your entire family?
It's like a mad truck hits you. It's very impacting. Not only because the child going through the eating disorder and all because it's a mental health aspect. So
do you blame yourself? Do you blame, is there any blaming in there involved?
I think you do in the beginning.
Okay.
You wonder, what did you do wrong? What could you have done? Why didn't I pick it up? Why did it go undetected? But they own it. It's their little secret. And when it comes out, it comes out. It comes out full force. And, and it's hard because family doesn't get it. Outside family members don't understand at all and have to be educated. And sometimes they still don't get it. They think that it's, she's being spoiled. She wants her own way. So they look at it as a different kind of behavior and not realize it's a lot to do with the eating disorder.
Well, eating disorders have been around since the 12th century, I've read. And so it's nothing that is new. It's just been dealt with differently. And with it coming to light now with so many more groups and so many more advocacy groups that are available and so many people stepping forward and sharing their stories such as you are, it's now becoming more understandable and more treatable. So if you stay with us, guys, when we come back, we're going to have Caroline Mendez and her daughter Samantha, who's in recovery. So call your friends, you don't want to miss this. There's lots for you to learn. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to the girls. Today our discussion is on eating disorders, specifically anorexia and bulimia. And joining us right now we have Caroline Mendez and her daughter Samantha, who is 19 years old. Thank you so much for joining us today on the girls to tell us about your story. So Caroline, we're going to start off with you and talk with us about when you first discovered that your daughter actually had an eating disorder.
First, thank you for having us. It was a little bit tricky because the eating disorder wasn't prevalent at first.
Okay.
In 8th grade, she retired from gymnastics. She was a competitive gymnast and was trying to find herself. And throughout the 8th grade into 9th grade, we experienced lots of extreme behaviors that were out of character. We walked the line, is it something of a normal teenage thing or is it something more? And we kept put out little fires, and then in January of that first year, there was an event that really was like, there's something more going on.
Now, when you mentioned some things that are out of character, what were they? So people can identify maybe with the little things.
Out of character for her, because she was always a little bit of a wild card. But things like not doing things she wasn't supposed to do. Like there was friends that were not really people that she would normally hang around with. We started seeing different types of behaviors like that. Saying she would go somewhere and not be there and be somewhere else. All of those kind of things, which can tend to be normal teen things, I guess, but they just kind of seemed extreme.
And out of character for
And out of character for her.
Okay.
So that was a red flag, and we kept trying to address the red flags. And then in the spring of her freshman year, she had about a kind of like a psychotic episode at the high school. And that started the first of our kind of psychiatric treatment. We still weren't sure what was going on until May of that year when a teacher saw her arms were all cut up and called us. And then that kind of triggered the whole, we then obviously didn't really know what to do, so we just went to an inpatient hospital and got her treated, and some other issues came out about her not eating, which was difficult to tell because of the gymnastics. She was always very thin. So all of these things kind of piggybacked on top of each other. And that's kind of where we first started finding out about self-harming and eating disorders.
So Samantha, your mother mentioned that you were harming yourself, self-harming. What was that the trigger? What triggered all of that for you? Or where did you make the change? You were in gymnastics, you were going along as a normal, healthy kid, and then all of a sudden something changed. Is there something that triggered that for you?
Well, for me, it's always been really hard to pinpoint exactly what happened. But when, like my mom stated, I did gymnastics for 10 years when I was a kid. It was my identity, and I think that was kind of the turning point for me is when I quit, because I lost my sense of identity. All I did was gymnastics. That was my life. So I don't know why it turned destructive. A lot of people turn things around for the better, but for me, it just kind of turned in, and I kind of regretted the decision to quit, and I didn't know who I was anymore. So I took all that anger and that frustration and that anxiety about who I am and what I'm doing with my life out on myself. First with self-harm and then with my eating disorder.
So from that moment when mom stepped in and said, we need to seek some help, correct? Where did you go from there? What was the next step from there when you said, okay, we know that there's a problem, now we have to rectify it?
Well, the first stop was we just got her right into a hospital because, again, everything was very, I don't want to say over the top, but very like in your face. It wasn't subtle one bit. So we would get her into the hospital, and then they had a discharge plan for her, and that was, I think you were discharged home and then ended up back in the hospital again. So we were kind of trial and error, trying to figure out what to do next and where to go. And then the eating disorder started. As she would not cut, she would restrict eating, and then she would drop a ton of weight. And then that brought a whole nother concern, so we started looking at that avenue for treatment. So for us, in the beginning, probably first year, I would say we weren't sure what was the prevalent issue.
So Samantha, you're primarily the one here that could help our viewers, anyone out there who might be struggling with an eating disorder. So in your words, just tell us what was going through your mind, what were you feeling at that time?
When I was in my eating disorder, I was feeling very isolated. I isolated myself from all my friends. I isolated myself from my family. And I wouldn't express my feelings to anyone, no matter what efforts my parents, my friends, therapists tried to do for me. I just wouldn't have it. So my behaviors turned inward. It just, I don't know.
When you were going through this, was there any form of the treatment that really clicked for you? Because you said now that you're in recovery, you're sort of in a balancing act right now. Is there something that helped you the most?
Well, for me, my disease, I had no trust in anyone else. I thought that this was the only way of life. I was going to end up in treatment for the rest of my life, or I was going to die. I didn't have any expectations of having a life outside of an eating disorder. So it was really difficult for me to change my train of thought to believe in recovery. So for me, I think the biggest aspect for changing that inner dialogue was getting into the real world. I got a job. I started going to college. I made more friends. Like doing things outside of treatment, outside of your eating disorder, outside of your comfort zone, I think was the biggest thing for me in my recovery. It made the biggest difference. And the identity piece was the huge thing for me because like I said, when I was a gymnast, that was my identity. Then it turned into my eating disorder was my identity. And then as I started progressing in recovery, I've found new facets of my identity.
So that was basically like your turning point.
Yes, exactly.
What advice would you have for someone who might be sitting there at home? Maybe, it could be boys or girls, if they think they're dealing with some of these issues that you've dealt with, what should they do?
I mean, it might sound like a cliche, but reach out. Whether it doesn't have to be your parents, it doesn't have to be anyone you even know. Call a helpline, call an aunt or an uncle or anyone that you can find and just tell them, because I think that is the first step. I personally had a really hard time accepting my disorder, so I think accepting that you have a problem and finding someone that you can confide in and trust to at least listen to you, I think is the first step.
And how does it make mom feel to sit here and listen to how far she has come since the beginning, I'm sure?
We went from being a mom where you're feeling like a failure because your basic needs are to feed your kid and you couldn't do it, to watching her now, she's my inspiration. I mean,
Yes.
I'm gonna cry, but just thinking about her journey and what it's done, it's given me a whole new perspective on life. I've learned a lot along the journey. There is hope, there's recovery, and as a mom, I would say to other moms, don't ever give up. Do whatever you have to do to keep your kid alive.
Well, your daughter has an inspirational message tattooed on her arm, and if you would read it for us, I think you would probably see yourself.
It says, I am what I choose to become.
And I think that should be the motto with everyone. That's a great message to
Yeah.
put out there.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story,
so much
and I
for
wish
having
you
us.
a lot of success. Certainly stay in touch with us. And what are you going to college for?
Nutrition, actually.
Very good. And you know what? You will help so many people with that, and
That's
you
the
also
goal.
help yourself with doing those positive affirmations.
Well, stay with us because coming up next we have Sonia and Kathleen Beyer, and it's another mother and daughter, and they'll share their story with us about their disorder as well. Welcome back to the girls. If you've just joined us, we've been discussing eating disorders on our show today, hoping to shed some light out there to anyone who may be struggling with it or anyone who doesn't understand it. It is a very misunderstood disease, and we would like for people to be educated on this. Joining us now, we have Sonia and Kathleen Beyer, another mother and daughter. And Kathleen, you've been struggling. You're 17 years old, first of all. And Sonia, you and your daughter have been dealing with this disease for over 5 years.
Yes,
is that
that's
correct?
correct.
All right, and I guess the best thing for me to ask you is, why don't you tell us about your story and your struggle? Where did it all begin?
It all began when Kathleen was about 11. She started with cutting in school. I think she had probably been bullied at that time, and that led to it. And it went from cutting into the eating disorder. And it just went on and on and on. We have been through different facilities and treatment centers. And I've seen this thing take away so much from her life. It takes over your entire life. It takes over, as I think has been said before, not only the child's life, but everybody in your family's life. You live and breathe this disorder.
Well, we thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us. And as your mom said, you started, this disease was found when you had some self-harm issues, right? So if you can explain to someone who actually doesn't go through or doesn't understand this disease, what actually do you get out of the self-harm? What does that do? How does one, what do you get out of doing that?
I mean, the self-harm it's kind of a release of endorphins in a sense. And then it's also, for me, I used it as two different things, the release of endorphins and then also the ability to not feel anything except for that cut that I made. So it's kind of just a distraction from my emotions. And it's kind of just something that helps me to feel better in the moment. And then but it doesn't really help. It kind of, after that moment passes, after you feel that release, everything comes crashing back down.
Then you have a guilt.
Yeah.
Okay, what was it that triggered your problem? Your mom said you were bullied. And so from being bullied, was that your way of dealing with bullying? Was it the emotion of feeling inadequate? What was the bullying about?
I think it was the latter of that, the feeling of inadequacy. The bullying didn't help at all either, and I didn't grow up with a very good father in my sense, and that was kind of like what was needed to help me grow. I needed someone there to help me grow. And I wasn't able to grow or move on, so I kind of stayed in my childhood state for a little bit, and I started self-harming and trying to distract from all the bullying that was happening at school and all the stuff that was happening at home. I just couldn't cope with both of it. And then I guess a year after I had started cutting, my parents finally split up, and that kind of made it worse as well. That kind of triggered the eating disorder.
How did you know about cutting? Like, where did you learn about this?
One of my friends had actually started doing it, and I kind of learned from her. And I mean, it may not have been the best way to deal with things, and I still don't think it's the best way to deal with things, but sometimes just seeing something happen and wanting to try it and then getting hooked on it. It's kind of like a drug. Everyone's doing it. Why don't you just try it? Peer pressure, yeah.
Okay, then your mom said from there that led to an eating disorder. So how do those two tie in?
They're both self-destructive habits. They both, I guess, bring you down a little bit and at the same time bring you up. When you're restricting, you feel powerful. There's a great sense of power that control that you have over everyone else. Like you can go days without food, or you can do this and this and this, while everyone else has to do something with food. It gives you a lot of control over yourself. Like you're allowed to control what you're eating, control what you're not eating, control how much you eat, control how much weight you lose. It's a very controlling thing.
And
Okay.
what helps? What helps you?
I think a lot of distraction helps me a lot, because my main struggle right now is like the bulimia. So I've struggled with that for 5 years, and distraction is a really great help. Just finding any ways to distract yourself, going out, going on a walk, talking to friends, drawing, coloring, knitting. Those are all great things that I use to.
So was your first goal when you set out to be thin, or to be a certain weight on a scale, or to be a certain size?
Yeah. When I was younger, I was a little chubby, and I got picked on for that. And I started to become very self-conscious about my body and about what I looked like. I would only wear baggy clothes. I would wear stuff that was too big for me, so you wouldn't see how big I was. And then in middle school, when I started to finally lose weight because I was growing and I was turning into a teenager, I started to lose weight, but it wasn't coming off quick enough. So I had joined some social media. Social media played a huge role in that. Specifically, I can name Tumblr, has a lot of people on there that are very sick. And that kind of got me into the sickness and wanting to lose weight. And then I would set goal numbers for myself, and then once I got to that number, it wasn't low enough, and I'd keep going and going and going until I ended up in a hospital.
So your advice as far as what is being done, because there aren't a lot of medical treatment centers out there. There's not a lot of help for these disorders.
Yeah, there's not a lot of education, there's not a lot of knowledge out there. And I think one of the key components is for somebody to recognize out there, especially in the health profession or in the schools, that these kids are actually suffering from this. That, and it's not just the drastic weight loss. I mean, as a parent, you're sitting there with the child, you see them day by day. It's very difficult to notice that they've lost all of this weight all of a sudden. There just is not the help. A lot of the centers that are out there simply become revolving doors where they put the weight on. They have to be careful how they put it on, because they can actually die if they're refed incorrectly. They can suffer heart attacks. They can end up in diabetic shock if they're refed the wrong way. And it's a huge struggle, I think, for a lot of the families that are out there. And with the children themselves, they go through this it's something called body image dysmorphia, where they look in the mirror and they could be malnourished and underweight, and yet they see themselves as obese. But that's a part of the disease as well.
And you're in recovery now.
I'm still going through outpatient treatment, seeing a therapist twice a week, dietitian once a week, medical doctors, but I'm trying my hardest.
Are you feeling better?
Recovery is not a straight line. It has its ups and downs, a lot of bumps in the road. I've definitely gone through a lot of those bumps, and I mean, I've made it over the humps, and I've made it over all the struggles that I've been through. So I don't see a point in quitting now and giving up and going back to my eating disorder now.
Well, we thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having
You're
us.
going to help a lot of people out there watching this show.
I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today on the show. Thank you for joining us, and as always, we look forward to seeing you next time on The Girls.